Hi everybody, I'm back with the third and the final section on Ode to Autumn. We are going to analyze this poem in detail. First of all, what is the poem actually about? It is a poem about autumn written as an ode with romantic features. It describes autumn in its different hues and textures with a rich sensory experience. The images are powerful and you have tactile, visual, auditory images scattered through the poem. There is also a very subtle an implicit indication that just as there is a cycle in the seasons, there is a parallel cycle in a human being's life. Spring representing the first part of youth, summer the second part, autumn middle age, and winter old age. So here there is a parallel between middle age and autumn. The poem also very clearly articulates that autumn is different from the vibrancy of spring, different from the energy of summer, different from the hibernatory mode of winter, but unlike what generally people think of autumn, he says it has its own sedate beauty. There is a certain mellowness, gentleness, and a calmness about autumn, which soothes a person's soul. It is really not a dying season as it is generally presumed. He gives it a totally different look and a feel and a texture. He describes it as a season of plenty, oozing, swelling, plumping. All these words indicate that it is a fruitful season. It's a season of maturity. It's a season of fullness. And it also has its fair share of beautiful colors and music. Remember the last stanza when he talks about the rosy hue and the stubble plains. Next, what would make this an ode? As I've already told you before, an ode is a lyric, but is a rather long form of a lyric. A lyric is a short poem which can be set to music. As you've already seen, there is a lot of music in his Ode to Autumn. The syllables follow the sense, the sound follows, the sense emanates from the sound. So not only does he talk about autumn, he also apostrophizes the sun and autumn and personifies them as friends. So he is describing in detail, which is another feature of an ode, the mellowing sun and autumn as represented in different activities. As a goddess in a granary, as a gleaner, as a harvester, as a person who's observing the juice oozing out of a cider press. So when he goes into such a detailed description of autumn, it becomes an ode because odes give you a rather detailed description of nature. And also, in his descriptions, there is a celebratory tone. There's a dog, very lofty and dignified picture, because as it is, autumn is a very mellow, mature season. As odes are celebratory, they're generally, they're generally a little uh, serious and formal. But maybe because of the theme used here, the mellowing autumn, the sedate autumn, the leisurely autumn, the relaxed autumn, we find less formality here. And it is an ode because, as I've told you, it can be set to music, it is a lyric, it uses a lot of detailed descriptions, it is celebratory, it talks about paying tribute to autumn, and it uses a fine rhyme scheme, and there is a richness of the experience of images. Ultimately, it's a feast for all the senses. Now let's look at it as a poem belonging to the romantic tradition. First of all, he talks about nature, which is the prime focus of romantic poetry. The very first stanza is about the onset of autumn, the second about autumn in full swing, and the third, the end of autumn and the beginning of winter. So he talks about all the three phases of autumn, and it's in a rural and pastoral setting. As he talks about nature, it's a romantic poem, it is nature centric, and it is set in the rural, pastoral side, where we are talking about common activities, not grand, heroic incidents, but winnowing, threshing, harvesting. So this is extremely common, ordinary activity which has been given a touch of beauty by the poet. So that makes it a very romantic poem. And also, one of the most important traits of romanticism is that it always talks about a bonding between man and nature, and there's always a parallel drawn between man and nature, man in nature, man versus nature, man within nature, man learning from nature. So nature becomes a kind of a canvas always for putting man in a particular position and understanding him through nature. So these parallels you understand in this poem, because we are talking about man's human being's cycle of birth, growth, productivity, slow maturity, degradation, and death, only to regenerate again. So this is represented through autumn. And as it is represented through nature, it becomes a romantic trait. We also see that there is a certain constant association and oneness with nature in the awareness of inevitability of change. If there is inevitability of change in nature, it is so also in human beings. So this is a very romantic trait too. And there is always the linkages between human and the natural world, because as I said, this creativity itself emerges through the idea of growth, uh, maturity, death, only leading to further regeneration. So this is also a very romantic theme. He also writes about simple activities in rural life. And this is an important trait of the Romantics. Look at the sensuous texture in the poem. As I've already told you in the beginning, descriptions play a very important part in Romantic poetry. Landscape becomes a very important character in any Romantic poem. And the Romantics always indulged in developing a sensuous texture to their poem, and Keats is a master of that. Through his figures of speech and auditory images, he manages to create a wonderful painting in his poem of Autumn. The emphasis on women also, and the women-centric approach to nature, is also a very romantic trait. Imagination is at peak here. Whether it is the texture of the poem, whether it is the use of figures of speech, whether it is the visual and tactile imagery, women-centric approach, all these can come through a fine application of imagination and a very sensitive application of imagination. You find that this kind of creativity, which emphasizes imagination as the tool or the instrument of literature or a composition, is the hallmark of the Romantics. They have given a lot of importance to the play of imagination in writing poetry. And you see it throughout the ode. The language he uses is also very, very simple. It is celebratory, of course, but the celebration is not represented through complex ideas or very complex words. The language is very simple. And look at the sheer unity and proportion that he brings out in the three phases of autumn. You don't find any disjointed word or line. One stanza flows smoothly into the other, as if you're looking at a landscape painting. And look at the textures and the colors used there. I'm sure when you go back and recollect, you can almost feel the velvety texture of the loaded wines with grapes, and the cedar press where the apple juice is oozing out, and the rosy hues of the sky which is kissing the landscape. And you can feel or hear the beauty and the joy of the insects and the little birds singing in the evening. So the entire unity of the poem has a classical mold to it, and a richness and a simplicity, but also very profound. This is a very primitive trait which the Romantics have constantly used. There should be simplicity of language, but depth in the emotion and the intensity and the experience of the poem. And you must have noticed that there is a kind of a relaxed, brooding contentment about the poem. There is no hurry anywhere, no haste. And autumn is a solid but gentle presence in the poem. So when he has dwelt so much on the very minute aspects of autumn, he has obviously written with nature as the central character in his poem. That makes it a poem of the Romantic tradition. So, whether it is the theme, which is nature, the way the theme is represented through detailed description, sensitive use of language, simple use of language, intense emotions and descriptions and sensory experiences. Though there is an intensity of emotion, the thoughts are not very complex in their articulation. All these make it a very romantic poem. Please take a look at all the questions and try and discuss these questions on your own by making points, taking down. Please focus on how it is an ode, a romantic poem, and how autumn has been described. What are the different techniques used? I hope you have understood the explanation. Thank you for coming with me through this journey of 3 lessons. This is the end of Ode to Autumn. I hope you have enjoyed it. Thank you.